Welcome to Exceptionally Speaking, the podcast where we explore how to better understand and support exceptional learners. I'm Dr. Meryl, and each week I sit down with dedicated educators, parents, and advocates to share real strategies, inspiring stories, and moments of hope. If you're enjoying these conversations or learning something new, please be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Today, we're diving into the fascinating intersection of gifted and Montessori education with my guest and friend, Alesandra Rodríguez. Alesandra is a bilingual early childhood adjunct professor at Front Range Community College and Mesa State University. She holds a master's degree in culturally and linguistically diverse education with a specialization in special education, and she serves on the board of directors for YBNeuro, a nonprofit supporting neurodivergent students. With over a decade of experience in early childhood, early elementary, bilingual, and gifted education, Alesandra brings deep insight into how Montessori classrooms can nurture gifted and twice exceptional learners. We'll talk about differentiation, acceleration, and how educators can balance freedom with structure to truly follow the child. You can find more information about all our guests at hex24press.com. Please enjoy Exceptionally Speaking with Alesandra Rodríguez. Hey, Alesandra, welcome. Thank you so much for spending some time on Exceptionally Speaking today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Me too. I know we've had a ton of conversations around our topic today. We're thinking about gifted student support, especially through Montessori education. And I'd love to open it up and have you share a little bit about your journey into working in education.
Well, my journey started actually back in Miami, Florida. I graduated with my bachelor's in elementary education and I started looking for a job. I always like to think about Montessori finding me in a way because when I was looking for a job, I ended up going into a Montessori school, and that's how I learned about it. I went through my lower elementary Montessori training through the American Montessori Society. I was there for about 2 years, and then soon after we moved to Denver. I continued my journey in a charter Montessori school. I started in the English classroom teaching kinder, first grade. You know how Montessori classrooms have mixed age grouping. After kinder first, which is not very traditional, we moved into the more traditional lower elementary first, second, and third. I was there for a few years. And then when the dual language program opened, I joined a year later. So I was also able to join the dual language program.
That's exciting. So I'm wondering, for our listeners who may not be as familiar with the Montessori philosophy, could you just explain it a little bit and how it may differ from what we see in traditional classrooms?
Absolutely. One of the aspects, as I mentioned, is that mixed age grouping. So traditionally you have that first, third grade. Then for upper elementary is fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. And we don't really have many middle schools that are Montessori, but that it also continues as well as in the infant years. So you might have heard it, follow the child, or supporting also the whole child. And that's where that differentiation comes in, which we'll talk more about and how that benefits our gifted students. A lot of hands-on materials and going from concrete to abstract and the pedagogy itself, right? Because when you're in a Montessori classroom, you have your math curriculum, your language, cultural, which is one of my favorites that involves that geography, history, botany, and zoology.
And so if I was looking in a Montessori classroom, just peeking through the window, what might I notice that would be different from a traditional classroom?
Flexible sitting has to what came to mind. First of all, you won't see desks for every student. Of course, there are going to be some spaces, but you see students working on their rugs, their Montessori rugs. That's where they bring their lessons. They have a work cycle, and that ideally is a uninterrupted 3-hour period during the day where students get to start and finish their lessons. That's where they can practice skills that have been presented as well as skills of interest. And at the same time, during that period, the teacher is usually working with small groups or teaching in small groups.
And so is there any whole group instruction, or is it really more limited and just small group and one-on-one instruction?
It's going to depend. And I would say one of the curriculums or subjects that are taught in a more whole group is going to be cultural. Because it's usually, you're following that scope and sequence. But when it comes to math, all of your students are going to be in different places. So you truly want to focus on that differentiation in smaller groups. My experience have always been in the public Montessori setting, which I know differs from private. So you might have, like I said, public Montessori schools where you have to teach certain lessons that are part of what we have to do in the public sector.
So when you started working in Montessori classroom, I'm sure you had gifted students in your classroom, but I'd love to know more about really that journey for you and how you realized how well Montessori education can really support gifted students and what you did to further your own education to make that experience better for students.
It was actually my first year in the charter Montessori school where I heard the word gifted. And so I had two students who were identified as highly gifted and talented. In a way, the curriculum itself and the way that Montessori works, as far as like providing that differentiation, allowed me to continue, as I mentioned before, following the child. So if the students were ready for the next multiplication lesson, I just kept going, right? We're not looking at, oh no, this student is in kinder and all I'm doing are kinder standards, but I was able to continue that. I did reach a point, I believe it was the second year, where I didn't know what else to teach them because my lower elementary curriculum, I basically reach all of the higher lessons. And that's where I truly seek training. And I completed the gifted and talented trainings from Denver Public Schools. And that's how I was able to bring in new strategies. And I have to say, an aspect that's really important with when we think about the Montessori pedagogy, supporting gifted and talented students, is the prepared adult. As the classroom teacher, you also need to understand how to differentiate. We don't want to have any gaps. It's not about moving faster and just teaching all the lessons, but making sure that we're setting up the foundations that our gifted and talented students need. And one aspect that was really helpful through the DPS GT training was the social emotional piece. We have to acknowledge that sometimes that is an area where our students need the support, the strategies, building that toolbox that we need to have in order to help them as well.
I think that's a really great point. And as we know, gifted education support looks different across states, across districts. And so, especially no matter where you are, but especially in the Montessori model, to really seek who's the expert in your building on gifted education. And if there's not one, where can you get some training that can really help student success? So I know Montessori classrooms really emphasize student choice and independence, and wondering how teachers can help balance like that freedom but with also structure that our gifted students and many of our students need.
Yes, and I think that's a great question because I think that's one of the aspects where you need to have the knowledge to differentiate. So it's not just choosing those lessons, but how do you balance it? So for me, it was through the use of our work plans. So work plans is also a tool that's used in Montessori classrooms where it's a way for students to have a guide on this is what I should be practicing, but there is also that space for choice. So if I know that last week I taught dynamic multiplication, and then the following week we want to make sure the student is practicing that skill until mastery before we move on. So that is a way of keeping that balance and checking for progress. And you mentioned part of it is also, if I'm not sure, how do I connect with the gifted and talented teacher at the school? And that's how, through talking to who at that point was our support person from the central office at DPS, that was a person that told me about the trainings. So I think that collaboration is going to be key, very important. And also my inspiration for a new book that I'm working on, where I'm going to focus on that collaboration piece between GT teacher, the Montessori teacher, and what strategies can be used for those conversations and applications in the classroom as well.
And I'm so excited about your book and your work. And so for Montessori teachers who maybe don't have a connection to a gifted expert, that they could use your book as a stepping stone to really help increase and support their practice for our gifted students. So I'm really excited about that. I do want to talk a little bit about acceleration because I think it's something that I think is happening a little bit more naturally in the Montessori model, especially as students are able to learn more at their own pace. But like you're saying, you may get to a point where you're at the end of your advanced materials for your lower elementary, and you have students who are beyond that. And so what did you do when you ran into that issue? And can you talk a little bit about the acceleration successes that you've had in the Montessori classroom?
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, it happens more organically, right? I'm continuing to teach the lessons. You're not holding anyone back. Not every first graders have to be learning the same material. But it did make me wonder what happens when the student goes to middle school? Because if you keep going and it's like, what is that going to look like? Another aspect could be you're collaborating the students in your lower elementary classroom. You can collaborate with your upper elementary, so that fourth, fifth grade integrated classroom. But how do we make an informed decision if whole grade acceleration or single subject acceleration is what's going to benefit the student best? So my first experience with whole grade acceleration was within those first few years where one of my HGT or highly gifted and talented students was whole grade accelerated. At that moment, we looked at the data. Of course, family was involved, student was involved. We were having the conversations, but we didn't have a system in place to guide us through it. It was try to make an informed decision to the best of our abilities. And at the end, the student did go through whole grade acceleration. I have to say it's a success story. All went well. The transition is in a way less noticeable. The students was still in the same classroom, but officially in the next grade level. Now, later, which I didn't mention at the beginning, but I was a GT curriculum specialist in DPS, Gifted and Talented Department. I got to support I want to say 2 or 3 students and this is specific to a Montessori public school for this process. So we did use the integrated acceleration system. If you haven't listened to that episode, you should. And we had the opportunity to use the integrated acceleration system to make these informed decisions. At the end, all students that went through that process were good candidates for whole grade acceleration. And as a team, we decided for those students to go to the next grade level.
Did you, throughout your processes of looking at whole grade acceleration, did you come up against anyone who had a negative view on acceleration within the Montessori model, or were they pretty accepting? What was that like?
I feel like more hesitant, to put it one way. It's like we did run into the mindset of we're already doing this. Why do we have to go through the paperwork? Right? Because if you're thinking, let's say it's a fourth grader is already accessing fifth grade material because the teacher is differentiating in the classroom. So it was more of why are we doing this? But once you explain it, and I mentioned in that piece, right, like what's going to happen to the student when they go to middle school and they are in that grade level, but they already have access to standards for that grade level. That is part of the explanation for families and for admin as well.
And I think that makes sense, and it helps protect the student's ability to grow. And like you're saying, there may not be a Montessori middle school option. And so if you're moving to more traditional public school from a public Montessori, that really having the right grade level for your academic level matters a lot. And it's gonna impact your learning experience. And better to go through the acceleration process with the teachers that know you than trying to have to restart it once you get to sixth grade.
Yes.
I would love to hear a little bit more about the school model that you worked at, which was not only Montessori, but also bilingual. And so what did that look like?
I have to say it was one of my favorite experiences in the classroom as a multilingual person myself. Being able to work with students who are working towards being multilingual as well was exciting. There was a lot of learning for myself. And one aspect that I enjoy the most, because at that point, when I was in the dual language Montessori classroom, I was already GT certified and Montessori certified, as I mentioned before, and it allowed me to see my Spanish speakers, so those students in their native language, how they communicate, how fast they're learning a new language, which, as we know, it's also a characteristic for GT students, right? Learning a new language at an accelerated pace. So I want to say we had identified 2 students whose first language was Spanish in that first year. And like I said, it's because they have that ability and opportunity to be seen. So when looking at traits and being able to see those traits in their native language was a strength for the student. I know if we had been in a English only classroom, they wouldn't have shown and for this specific student, their area of giftedness was reading. So I wouldn't have been able to notice how are they able to think critically? How can they access above grade level text as well as understanding it? And just the way that they communicated, I could tell the vocabulary that they were using. And within this process, right, for a native Spanish speaker, they're working towards acquiring English. And that is that beauty of a dual language classroom. And as we know, learning a second language, third language, or whatnot, at an accelerated rate is also a trait of giftedness. And so just being in that environment, being able to see it and being able to fully identify a student as GT in reading was one of my favorite experiences.
That's really exciting. So, considering our Montessori teachers who may be listening to this and thinking through their lens on like, okay, I really want to support gifted students better. Do you have a couple tips that they could start right now that could help them?
Yes, I would say thinking about that collaboration with the gifted and talented teacher in the building or specialist that supports the school. Also for language learners, which as you know is one of my passion topics, is if you are in that English classroom, if you're a monolingual teacher, that's okay. There are other people that you could be communicating and connecting with. That can be the family or the ELD teacher in the building and seeing how they're performing in the classroom. Choice, like leverage that choice aspect that is natural within Montessori, but though sometimes we can do a little more with it so they can truly explore and their curiosity and creativity through that choice lens.
That's really helpful. And then thinking about our families, I know that there are quite a few early education, preschool Montessori schools, and you have families who may believe that their child is gifted but may not be identified yet, right? And might be wondering, should we choose a Montessori elementary school for our child? And so, do you have anything that would be helpful for families to consider on why Montessori might be the best route for their gifted child?
One, I would say yes. Well, one of them I feel like is a recommendation really in many instances for families is go observe, explore the environment. What does it look like? A lot of times we hear things, but without seeing it, there's a disconnect or it can be different. But also, if your child may benefit from accessing above grade level material, yes, this is a good option. If we're thinking about a twice exceptional student who may be performing really well in math, let's say, but also has hyperactivity in any way, having that flexibility of I get to choose my space, I get to choose my lessons can also be very supportive. And just again, I want to mention that prepare adult piece, thinking of, okay, who are the teachers, who are the adults in the school, and how is this going to support my child?
I think that's great advice. And I also think on the twice exceptional side, Montessori can really be a huge support, especially as there's the multi age classrooms and maybe not feeling as singled out if you have a learning disability that affects reading really specifically. However, you have a strength in math and maybe you're gifted in math. And so your teacher can simultaneously support those and is used to supporting different strengths across content areas. And so I think it's a really super viable option that parents should consider.
Absolutely. And well, when you mentioned that piece, thinking about that social emotional aspect as well. If you have a child who often, it's in preschool or is in pre-K, but is usually the child that connects more with adults or with older students, think about that environment, right? Like child is coming into, let's say, first grade, but they get to connect with third graders and it's natural. There's no, you're in first, you're in second. The idea is that they get to communicate, to learn from each other, to work with each other where they're at. So I think that's also a great benefit of the Montessori integrated or mixed ages classroom.
So I know you've had the pleasure as you've moved away from classroom teaching and being more of a teacher coach and adjunct professor and all these other roles you've gotten to have, but also gotten to be a school board member as well. And so what would you say the benefits are of having a Montessori charter model that you've seen?
Well, one of the main benefits is for communities to have access to Montessori education. And that is when we think about our low income communities, having that access to public Montessori education is a plus. Dr. Maria Montessori, when she started Casa de Bambini, or Children's House, back in 1907, actually started in a low income neighborhood. So thinking through, how it started, why it started, I think it's one of the greatest benefits.
I think that's a great point. And I think a really big strength on charter models, at least as we know them in Colorado, it gives the opportunity for different, really specific school models like a Montessori dual language model. And of course, there's gifted students at every school, but looking at how that can help support our gifted bilingual students, especially. So, really encourage parents to just see what's available in your area. And like Alessandra said, take a school tour, ask the questions on how do you support advanced students? What does this look like for social emotional support? Can be really helpful. So, the last question I like to ask all of my guests is really what's bringing you hope right now?
For me, is community collaboration. I'm actually part of a nonprofit, YBNeuro, which just this past week we had our board meeting, and it was so excited to hear all the activities that are being put into place to support our neurodivergent students. And so we have informational sessions with family. We have groups with students, opportunity for extracurricular activities, and this is happening in Denver. So it truly makes me smile and feel hopeful for our students, especially the ones that may not have that access without nonprofits like this one.
Thank you so much. Thank you for doing the work that you do. I'm so excited to see the progression of your book, and I would love to have you back on once it's published and we can continue this conversation. So thank you so much, Alessandra.
Thank you so much for having me.
This episode of Exceptionally Speaking is brought to you by Hex 24 Press, where education meets imagination. I founded Hex 24 Press in 2024 to uplift educator voices and provide a publishing home for myself and other educators to bring our work into the world. You can find more information about today's guests, including links to their resources and services, at hex24press.com. Thank you for supporting educators, independent creators, and small business. We're so glad you're here.